the Bible, you'll find out that God's not too happy with what's going on around us.
Redeem the time, because the days are evil.
The Bible has not changed.
Boldly proclaim the restoration and preservation of Christian values in America.
Satan has brainwashed a whole nation.
As goes the church, so goes the nation.
Nobody's convicted of anything anymore.
And now, here's Last Call with your host, B.J. Edwards.
The American Gulag Chronicles, folks. Our buddy David Summerall was on Tucker, Fox News this week. Good for him. Good for Tucker. By the way, if you're tuning in today and you want to be a victim and you want petted, ain't going to happen, okay? This is the wrong place for you. Go ahead and turn on, with the exception of Tucker, go ahead and turn on Fox News or your neighborhood news broadcast, and they'll take care of you. They'll tell you how much you can't do, all the things that are going wrong. And Mr. Anderson, please mute yourself. And how your government can take care of you. That's what they do. Go to your congressman. He'll take care of you. Or your state senator or state congressman. They'll take care of you. They'll fix the problem for you. Folks, it's you. It's you. Let's see what we got here from our guest. Hang on a second. You're listening to Last Call. We don't have to have video, David. Like to have it, but we don't have to have it. You just come in and we'll take care of you there. There's talk, by the way, speaking of the news media, of a former president, which you would not hear on today's Last Call, and you didn't hear it last week. I refuse to give the idea any credibility, whatever that idea is, other than possibly make a joke out of it. By talking about it, perhaps we're actually speaking it into existence. We're piling on to the troubles, the many troubles that we have, and we're so helpless and we can't do anything. Think about it. When you talk about it from either side of the equation, what are you doing? You're making it real, aren't you? And then if it doesn't happen, well, now, where are you and what have you wasted besides time and energy, which you could have used productively in another area, say by attending a local school board meeting or city council meeting or township meeting? Or how about finding a church, talking to the pastor there? Talk to them about the Natural Family Month. Talk about them, how Christians should be salt and light and not hide and not beg people to do things. This insanity needs to end, folks. But it's going to end at the local level. Get to know your sheriff, the highest official in the land, because you may need him very soon. So if you hunger for that victimology, go ahead and turn us off and turn on Fox News or the local news. They'll take care of you. They'll fill your bag. And you can still sit in your chair, drinking your favorite adult beverage, and you'll be fine. Steve Deace, a fellow broadcaster, I have hundreds of people that send me emails and recommendations, and I happened to look at this one that Steve had presented to me. It was about a library in Idaho and what happened. Folks, again, when we show up, we're in God's will, we win. I'm going to play this video from Steve. I'm going to play the video from Steve, and then we're going to get back to business and what I did after I saw this video. Mr. Anderson, if you would, please.
Some Feedback Friday, and I want to begin with a really cool and inspiring note. Now, when I tell you what the subject matter is, at first you're going to think, what is inspiring about this? But just hang tough here, New Kids on the Block. Hang tough, all right? This past weekend, I attended my very first drag queen storytime hour, and I left inspired. Now, let me pause, right? In almost every context, when a text or an email or a blog or a social media post begins with this sentence, it's downhill from there, like way downhill, like, right? Like
David French downhill.
Yeah, as far downhill as you can go, like hell, okay? But again, hang in there. But it wasn't the show that inspired me. Rather than polluting the minds and souls of innocent children, the drag queens and other demonic performers read their stories and performed their acts before a solemn, resolute, and prayerful crowd of adult Christians. Listen to this, guys. This is one of the most badass things I have seen in my whole career. Not just on this issue, like in my entire career. This is as badass as it gets. To be sure, these good Christians came to the event not to be entertained, but to stand in the gap between those who want to drag all kids into their own demonic realm and the innocent children dragged to such a wicked event by their sick moms. Here's how it went down. After the announcement of one of these drag queen storytime hours to be held at the Marshall Public Library in Pocatello, Idaho, on a Saturday in February, several pastors of different churches and denominations organized a coalition. How good and pleasant it is when we dwell together in unity and praise the Lord, the psalmist says. Several pastors of different churches and denominations organized a coalition of willing grown-ups to come early, occupy all the seats, and stand between the pedo groomers, perverts on the stage and their targets, the innocent children. When my wife and I arrived a full 30 minutes before showtime, all but 4 seats were occupied. And soon every seat and much of the standing room was taken entirely up by this Christian army. A few minutes later, 2 woke moms squeezed into the back of the room with 4 kids in tow. The show was about to begin when one of the moms not so quietly complained to her children how sad it was for them to not be in the front and how difficult it was for them to sit all the way in the back. She entirely missed the point. 2 minutes into the show, as planned, one of the pastors explained to the library director, listen to this, guys. This is only getting better, man. This is as badass as it gets. And now, okay, that was just the first wave, okay? That was just the first wave. Now comes the heavy artillery. Listen to this. This is, do we have Rocky music? I mean, this man right here, okay? 2 minutes into the show, as planned. They had a plan. One of the pastors explained to the library director how the maximum occupancy of the room was clearly violated by the crowd size. The director, a well-trained bureaucrat, was forced by his own rules to clear the room of all of those not seated, including all the woke moms and their kids in the back who didn't have seats. The moms and woke supporters were forced to therefore leave the event. This has got to be a frickin' movie, man. Are you kidding me? There were 10 to 15 other children who never even made it into the room in the first place. Kids would not be partaking of any of this debauchery. The performers, void of any child targets or their parents in the room, nonetheless persisted in their show. They were not happy, but I guess they stupidly and arrogantly thought that they could teach the Christian crowd a thing or two about their sickness. Their 2 book readings and 1 ukulele sing-along were met with silent, defiant defenders of values and God's commandments. The audience did not applaud. Aaron, get me some cigarettes, okay? I mean, this is the hottest thing I've ever read in my life right here. And when this is done, I'm going home to find out what the wife is doing, okay? The audience did not applaud, did not sing along, did not participate. Instead, they quietly read their Bibles, bowed in prayer, and thereby peacefully protected children. It was inspiring. Yeah, it is. I'm reading this like for the 4th time, and I'm fired up like I'm reading it for the first. It was spiritual. Despite the demons reading and relating immoral and vile alternatives to God's law, the warmth and comfort of God's love filled the room and overpowered them. I was deeply moved. Our cause, God's cause, requires action and dedication. As you mentioned last week on your show, do not call out the demons unless you are ready and committed to take the battle to them down with your swords. Showing up to these battlegrounds will give us small wins at first, but it will also embolden the demons to build their forces, sharpen their tactics, and increase their fervor. We need to overpower them. As Elisha said to his servant when it looked like they were facing an insurmountable army, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. Elisha asked the Lord to open his servant's eyes so that he too could see the multitudes of horses, chariots, and warriors standing at the ready to win the day. We are in a war. It is indeed crazy versus normal. That was Sarah Huckabee's line last week. Better put, it's demonic versus God-fearing. We should be comforted by Elisha's account. Indeed, more be with us than be with them. However, we must engage. We must act. I pray we will do that. This event gives me hope. That is from Ronald M. Nate, and I love this too. Ph.D. Ronald M. Nate, Ph.D. in Rexburg, Idaho.
Okay, let no good deed go unpunished, right? So what did I do? Did I go home and look up the wife? No, that's not me. That's not me. I have a friend in Idaho, and I said, look, I need to talk to some of these folks that were at that. Wouldn't you want to talk to some of those folks who were actually there, that showed up, said nothing, yet stopped the indoctrination of our children? Wouldn't you want to talk to them? Well, guess what? Today's your lucky day. We have one gentleman who was there. And I talked to the pastor, by the way, that was there as well. And he may or may not be able to make it on this morning. But we're going to bring David Worley on. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to bring David Worley from Pocatello, Idaho on. He is an Idaho native, a Christian, Iraqi war veteran, and Republican chair for the Idaho State Legislators. Married, has 5 children. He's evidently a big fan of drag queen shows in libraries. Mr. Anderson, if you will, take us to break, and we'll bring.
Last Call with BJ Edwards. Real talk about real life.
And we are back. When I saw this Steve Deace video, I mean, I stood up and went, yes, go team. Now, I need to talk to somebody that was there. Well, through several channels, I was able to talk to several individuals, and I talked to one David Worley, who is from Pocatello. David, welcome to Last Call, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, hey, you're welcome. It's evidently it's become a custom for many families at Marshall Public Library. That's the library in Pocatello, right?
Yes.
Okay. Once a month, a group of local drag queens get together dressed in colorful, flashy costumes, elaborate wigs, and in full makeup to promote literacy, acceptance, and kindness to a local group of kids and their parents. Personally, no, I'm not going to talk about the parents. Anyway, whatever possessed you to get into this battle, David? First of all, how did you find out about what was going on at the library?
So they're very open about it. I mean, they put flyers up about it. They have a whole Facebook page devoted to this thing. So it just kind of came through the grapevine that we knew that this was going on. You know, particularly a woman here in town called me one day and said, hey, you know, I watched you when you ran for Senate in our district, and I think that's something you need to know about. And they asked me to kind of look into it and help out with the small group they put together. And the more we learned about it, I mean, it just became clear from the get-go that, you know, this isn't even just a guy sitting in a room, you know, in a dress reading Mother Goose. This is, when they talk about, you know, inclusivity and all this stuff, what it really is grooming children into sexual deviancy and sin. And I just think that you can't tolerate that in your community.
Good for
If
you.
you let it start anywhere, it'll just keep going, and it just destroys. Anywhere this ideology goes, it destroys.
David, children know the difference between a male and a female, don't they? I mean, inherently they know that.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
when they go into that, now please think about this, folks. I'm sorry, I'm all excited, David. I'll try to settle down. When they go in, when you drag your children into a drag queen show, you're going to a religious service, folks. They are praising, they are worshiping men who are trying to look like women. Lipstick. You can put lipstick on a pig, right? But it's still a pig.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that we got to remember about these organizations and these groups. I mean, you even listen to some of their own internal communication, some of the podcasts they have for themselves. They talk about, just like, matter of fact, they reference the Bible. They talk about what they're doing is making disciples. That they're going out and they're going with a new form of morality, a new way of thinking, a new worldview, and they want to bring people into it. Really, these are missionary efforts from a demonic religion. I mean, these are the doctrines of demons. It takes everything that comes out of the Word of God, twists it, turns it inside out, calls good evil, evil good. This is exactly what we're talking about, what Isaiah warned about. And that's why it just had to be directly confronted. And so we're looking at what is a tactic that would be effective here, because you can stand outside with signs, you can do all this type of stuff, and really all you end up maybe having is an altercation with the police, and nothing really changes. So we thought, what's a way for us to peacefully actually shut this thing down? And after consulting with some various people, a couple lawyers had some suggestions. I want to give a shout out to Liberty Counsel. You've probably heard of them before. They do a lot of First Amendment work, religious liberty work, and they said, hey, look at the library's policy, but you could probably do an effective sit-in. And so we did. So went in there, took up the space, like that spot you read from Steve Deace, and found out that we could use their rules against them. The fire code's very strict on how many people could be in that room. We filled it to capacity, and we peacefully stopped their event. And the good news is that people got to remember this. Sometimes we think the radical left, we think the devil is 10 feet tall. We did this one time, and they pulled their event from the library. One time. We were prepared to do it every single month. We had to do it indefinitely if necessary. But these people are not invincible. It seems that way, that the left-wing juggernaut is unstoppable, but it's not. You just need to stand up against it.
Okay, we're going to close the show down now, because that is the exact message I want to send to our listeners. When we show up, we're in God's will, we win, folks. Now, it's not always we win. Christianity wins. Our Creator wins, but it's not always exactly what we think it's going to be. It's sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we want it to. We're very impatient, stop and go type nation. But this was just incredible. By the way, hasn't this drag queen story hour been going on for years?
So it's been going on in fits and starts in our area, but the group itself has been organized for quite some time. They've been trying it for years. And as a matter of fact, they've tried in other public venues, been forced into private venues before. That's where we're at now. Matter of fact, sadly, you talk about this being a religion. So they end up finding an alternate location. Well, guess who brought them in? It's our local synagogue, Temple Emmanuel, ended up being the new location.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Temple Emmanuel, our local synagogue, ended up hosting them instead of the library. So when we talk about this being a religion, there's two ways you got to look at that. One, this is their own religion, wokeism, whatever you want to call it. The spirit of the age, as Steve Deace calls it. But when we look at other religious groups out there, just because someone, it's called a church or a synagogue, or they claim to be Jewish or Christian, doesn't mean that they're actually supporting biblical morality. And this other group was fine to bring them right in. So that's a battle for another day. But the point is that we have to recognize that this is a religious movement, and often they have apostate Jews and apostate Christians as their allies.
If you'd appreciate a letter from the National Director of the Natural Family Foundation, get me that information on that synagogue, and I'll be sure to write them a love letter. Organizer Joseph Krupper, who goes by Miss Collie J while in costume, says
Yeah.
it's a family-friendly program aimed at instilling a love of reading in the younger generations. They want to instill love. But anyway, topics such as being brave, being a good friend, learning to deal with emotions are typical during reading time with the Queens. But last Saturday's event wasn't typical. Instead of an audience of children and parents, David and friends showed up. And I love the fire code thing. I love the fire code. You basically took all the seats. It was standing room only. And then did somebody go to the library director and say, you know what? I was just thinking there's an awful lot of people in here, maybe more than the fire department would allow. Should we do something about it? Is that what happened?
Yes. So I went and talked to the library director and notified him that the room was beyond its capacity listed by the room policy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I'll tell you, this is the thing we have to learn how to do. You know, if you can't get the policy changed, if the bureaucrats are against you, which in most institutions they are, if the elected officials are against you, like in our community, you got to learn how to use their own rules against them. So, I mean, it's a fine day when you see a bureaucrat short circuiting when he's saying, oh, I must mindlessly enforce the rules, but the rules in this case don't favor the people who I want to favor.
Shoot them with their own gun. Shoot them with their own gun, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and that was planned because we knew that, you know, we weren't going to be, if we went in there yelling and screaming or making noise or being disruptive, all they do is they call the police and then you got to leave. And, you know, if we got arrested, you know, or anything like that, that's not the optics we want, but also that's not really the intent. The intent was, how do we stop this so we are not exposing children to this content? And, you know, yes, I showed up with some people I knew, but we really got to give Pastor Whitaker a shout out. And people got to remember that clergy still have an incredible amount of power and respect.
Amen.
And when clergy get onto the battlefield, their people will follow them. And that is one of the most powerful things I have seen in these types of fights that we're having over these issues is whenever a pastor decides that he's going to put fighting for truth and righteousness above what's expedient or what's comfortable, I believe that God blesses those efforts in particular.
Now for sure we're going to end the show because it isn't going to get any better. You drew the players in that need. Look, there's a bully pulpit, folks, and it's been quiet. It's been quiet, but it's now starting to wake up a little bit. By the way, I did talk to the pastor that David's referring to, and had a nice conversation with him. I wanted to get him in on the show this morning as well, on the broadcast this morning as well, but I think he's got other things that he's doing. He recommended I give David a call, which I did, and I'm very pleased that I gave David a call. But you need to understand something, folks. This maybe isn't as biblical as you want it to be, but prayer without works is dead, in my humble opinion. Okay, every time,
the book of James, that's perfectly biblical.
Every time I pray, there's two problems with prayer. Every time I pray, all I hear from God is how to do more and how to do it a different way than I'm thinking about. Okay. And I'm going, no, God, you don't understand. I'm praying so somebody else will have to do something to come along and help me. Okay. That's why I'm praying for. I never hear that back. Then when I hear other people praying, and I've said this to a prayer group before, please stop praying. And they go, what? Yeah, because every time you pray, you give me more to do. And that's because you aren't listening. The message does come back to you folks. A big part of why we're here on planet Earth is for our growth as a Christian, as a believer in our Creator. That's to me, that's that's what I have learned through bangs and dings, which I don't want to hear the recording. When I go to heaven, they have a recording there, and it's basically B.J. Edwards. And I'm going to explain B.J. Edwards to you in a moment. B.J., do you remember saying this? I'm going, I really don't. Are you sure that's me? You sure that I would never say anything like that? I would never call you that, Lord. And I would never put you down like that, Lord. I didn't understand what was happening to me, but I had I don't know where I'd be if those rough times had not happened to me. I really don't know. Let me explain to you, BJ, and when we come back, I want you to talk a little bit more about what happened, how the groups got together, because it wasn't just something that you put a notice out and everybody just gravitated to you. There had to be some work behind this, some timing behind this. And I want to talk about this. I identify for 2 hours every Saturday morning as B.J. Edwards. My given name is Jim Harrison, James Harrison. People call me JR. They call me other things too. But when I was growing up, I had a father. Well, nobody's totally worthless. They can always serve as a horrible example. That was my dad. He was an abuser. And you name the abuse, he did it. He had no limits. And he had a little bit of Indian blood in him. So every Friday night, he'd get a little firewater in him, and he would get, well, belligerent. And my mom, by the way, who was a devout Christian, interesting dynamics, would defend herself. And I could hear pans thrown around, and I could hear, screams. And, when I was, this is when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. All this is going on. Well, one night, it was really bad. By the way, they always fought in the kitchen, and my room was just above the kitchen. My bedroom was just above the kitchen. So I could catch most of this. Anyway, a terrible fight. And then the door slammed, and it got really quiet. And I went, uh-oh, I hope mom's okay. So I'm creeping downstairs, and I start to turn around the room to the parlor, and I can hear my mom praising hymns, or playing hymns on the piano, praising God. So I figured everything is okay. I turned around, and what I saw was where my father had hit her right in the forehead, blood dripping down off her nose onto the piano keys, singing praises to God. My mother's maiden name was Edwards. Her name was Bertha Jean. So every Saturday morning, I remind myself where I came from. And I use B.J. Edwards as my nom de plume, if you will. So in case you ever wonder, ever curious, people call me JR, Jim, whatever. But for 2 hours on Saturday morning, I identify as B.J. Edwards. And for a good purpose. And it's always a reminder of where I'm coming from. And my mom had me in church on Sunday. And then I was in choir on Wednesdays. Got into the youth group, if you will. But I'm going to tell you that once I turned 18 and went to college, I was headed right where my dad was. But what I was trying to do was trying to fill that vacuum, that fatherless vacuum. My father didn't want anything to do with me. He didn't care for me. Didn't spend any time with me. Like he didn't exist. And I was trying to fill that vacuum with drugs, sex. Some people try to fill it with gangs. It doesn't make any difference. There's an incredible vacuum that's created. Now, I am grateful for that now, and I'm grateful for those other bangs that I've got in life, because it's taken the rough edges off. And no, I'm not asking for more of that, Lord. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking for more of that. Hey, enough about me. I want to get our guest back, David Worley, back on. Mr. Anderson, if you could take us to a break. And David, I want to talk about the actions here. I mean, this just wasn't you snapped your fingers, showed up, and something good happened. There had to be some planning. You already mentioned Liberty Council, but and the pastor, but there's other people that was involved here as well. There wasn't just 3 people in that room. There was other people in the room. How did they get there? And by the way, David, they're coming back. Okay. They're like the Energizer Bunny. They're coming back. And like you said, they're going to a synagogue right now, but they want that library. They've already claimed it. They want it back. Mr. Anderson, if you would, B.J. Edwards along Mr. Anderson, this is your last call.
Last call with B.J. Edwards. Real talk about real life.
Now, thank you very much. We are on with David Worley from Pocatello, Idaho, and David helped a large group of people stop a presentation that has been going on in a local library of a religious service held by the drag queens. And David, I'd ask you before the break, how long did it take for you to finally get enough people into that room? What was the time period? What led up to it, if you would, sir?
So it took a few weeks, and we got a small group together, about 8 to 10 people. Originally it was a handful of gals who were really concerned about it. They brought me in, and we kind of tossed around different ideas because we had 2 objectives. One of them is obviously to stop the drag queen show and to get protect these kids from being exposed to this type of material. But also our library, like a lot of libraries around the country now, almost all of them have an incredible amount of pornographic material in there, and stuff that's designed to, again, groom and indoctrinate children into radical sexual ideology and sexual deviancy. So we want to also bring exposure to that. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of organizing, there's really 3 key factors. One, you got to have a plan that's going to have desired effect. We kind of already talked about that. 2, you got to have a critical mass of people. And how you get that, I think, is that if you really look what happened in our area, we have been working for actually years now to organize conservatives in our area. So when this, issue came up, it's not that we're from scratch trying to build a group. It was a small group that wanted to tackle this issue, but there was a broader coalition of conservatives that we were able to work with that have been organized over the past couple of years over multiple campaigns to get conservatives elected into local and our local office and our legislature. And so that was a group of people we drew upon. And then, so you kind of got to get that critical mass together. And then the last thing was, bringing the clergy who we knew who were on board. So one pastor, was willing to talk about the event in his church, even though he didn't personally attend. But we had another pastor, already mentioned Pastor Whitaker, who went all in.
Hold on a second. Why clergy? Why would you want to involve the clergy in this? Why was that important?
So like we talked about earlier in the last segment, so a lot of people, and if you go to a church, you shouldn't go to a church, honestly, unless you agree with the doctrine. And then I think, especially if you're a Protestant and you just have a choice of wherever you want to go, you should be confident that you will follow that pastor. And so a lot of people, rightfully so, will follow the leaders of their church. And when you get a pastor involved, he comes with a different level of authority than just a citizen off the street. I mean, look, I'm a local guy. I'm a, officer in the Republican Party, I'm an Iraq War veteran, but I don't have a pulpit. I'm not a trained clergyman, and so when these guys get up and they say, no, this is a moral issue, and they talk to their people and say, hey, we need to fight on this, people will mobilize out of their congregation. Even people outside their congregation will mobilize. And I think that that's a critical factor here. The church has been on the sidelines, or has been, in worst cases, complicit with a lot of this stuff. And once a pastor gets onto the battlefield, I think the ball game just changes. There's a lot of people that will step up to the plate who wouldn't do it otherwise. And, Pastor Whitaker, like I said, went all in, brought, not just said like, hey, a passive invitation to his congregation. I mean, called people, arranged transportation. I mean, the guy went all out, and that's exactly what we mean. I think what it really means, you actually have a shepherd of a flock. Shepherd of the flock is not just willing to find the lost sheep, but he's also willing to confront the wolves. And that's what separates, men like Pastor Whitaker from a lot of other people, unfortunately, who happen to be, have a pulpit.
When we show
but I think that's key.
Yep. When we show up, we win, folks. When we show up, we win.
And Alan, unless you have a follow-up question, I'd just like to make one point.
I have somebody that wants to ask you a question, but go ahead.
Sure. So I'll throw this out there too. The initial group of people that were really concerned about it was a group of women, and they are incredible. One of them took a lot of risks. She works for the library.
Whoa.
Took a lot of professional risks to help to get this thing going, and kind of let us know exactly what was going on there. But it is so critical for men to get involved and lead and participate. And that was a great thing about that group that participated in the sit-in. A lot of times you go to, unfortunately, a lot of political events and things like this, and you see a room that is almost completely full of women. I'm not downgrading the good work that women do, but there is a courage and a strength and a fortitude that men bring to an action, and it gives the women more confidence. One of them flat out told me, she said, look, I'm uncomfortable getting involved in this unless there's some men that get involved, because we know the left can be violent and they can be vile. And it's not really the responsibility of women to fight evil. That is a responsibility that God gave men. And when men get off the couch, stop watching football for a minute, and then get onto the battlefield to fight in their community, things can change.
Outstanding. Folks, you need to share this portion of our show with everyone that you know. And by the way, David, this isn't your first rodeo. You've obviously got some experience here in the political arena, in the activist arena. And I want to note, I'll note it before the next break. But I think Tom, you want to bring Tom on, Mr. Anderson? I think he has a comment or a question or two.
Okay.
Hi, David. I just wanted to salute you for what you did and what you're saying today on the show. I'm totally in agreement with it. I'm a big fan of the Steve Day show. I know that Steve was so fired up when he read about what had happened, because that's exactly what he and BJ have. That's what their shows are all about, is about doing things, being a doer. And BJ, I know you mentioned at the beginning your story about you with how you got the name BJ Edwards.
Yeah.
Your mom planted that seed in you of Christianity
that
led you to where you are today.
Yes,
and
sir.
David, by the actions you did at that library with the others, you're planting seeds along the way to help other people become, especially men, as you said, become more courageous and actually start to take action to take our country back and fight the evil that's upon us. And there must be something in the water out there in Idaho, because I'm working with a nurse out there. Her name's Laura Demaray, and she is right now one of the ones that's fighting to get legislation passed to outlaw the mRNA injections across the state. Actually, get your state legislature to put into effect a state law to ban anybody from ever giving the mRNA injections again. So I salute you folks out there in Idaho. You're freedom lovers. You're doing the right thing. You're following what God wants you to do, and you're standing up and you're fighting back against the evil. So good on you, David.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hang in there, Tom. I got something else to say. I was going to bring it up. I'll do it now. David's also a commissioned infantry officer in the Army National Guard with 19 years of public service as a member of the armed forces, including 12 years of active duty. Tom is a retired Air Force major. And you had mentioned something before about the librarian who took a chance. Tom believes very much in what he believes in and is willing to stand up for it. Tom, after he retired, went to work as a contractor for the U.S. government. But when it came time for required to take the COVID shot, and he was making very good money. I mean, he put a lot of money. I think you were making $160,000 or $165,000 a year. You put that all on the line and basically told the company commander. And by the way, David, he CC'd this email that he sent his company commander to the entire base, that he was really not telling the truth, if you will. I'm not. These are my words, not Tom's. But he basically called out the company commander, and I think it wasn't days, but it was hours later. He was no longer making $165,000 a year. You got to count the cost, right, Tom?
Yeah. BJ is right. I sent an email to a 3-star general when in 2021, in October of that year, when the mandates came down, the dates for everybody had to get their shots by. I was a defense contractor working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, and the 3-star general, his email had kind of insulted those of us who didn't want to get the jab, saying we've lost too many unvaccinated airmen, etc. So I sent back an email to him. I said, basically, shame on you for not letting us decide for ourselves whether or not to take an experimental drug. Instead, you chose to spend your time trying to guilt us into taking the jab. Shame on you. And I sent that back, and I CC'd all 30,000 people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on my email. I knew what was going to happen. I got fired from my job within a half hour. But it was none of the colonels, none of the generals. There was no courage being exhibited in standing up against this, what I believe is an unlawful order, right? Requiring you to take an experimental drug and inject that into your body is an illegal order. So it should never have been followed, but there was no pushback whatsoever. So it goes back to what you were saying earlier, David. We have a deficit of courage in this country, especially in men. And we need to fix that problem. We need to be able to find our courage and stand up and do what God wants us to do, stand up for what's right. Any advice in that front?
Thank you, Tom.
So I'll tell you, I was in a similar boat. I spent the last year, of my career actually being kind of a limbo status because I also didn't want to get the vaccine. And so my religious waiver was sitting at some unknown level of bureaucratic processing for a year. I will credit my chain of command that although they were not aggressive in defending their people who didn't want to get the shot, they also, unfortunately, like a lot of military units, were also not aggressive in trying to get rid of people. So at least passively did what they could to try and help us out. But this is an issue that, is beyond, like we talked about, not just the issue of Drag Queen Story Hour, but yeah, there's a lot of things during COVID, saw the same thing. I personally believe that if large numbers of men had just refused to comply with the lockdowns and all the other insanity that went on during COVID, it would have ended a lot quicker. I saw this phenomenon in my local community. My wife would go to the grocery store and get berated by, the clerk or whoever, the manager, for not wearing a mask. When I went to that exact same store and didn't wear a mask, no one said a thing. And I think that just goes back to the point where, again, I applaud our women when they want to do the best they can to fight, but we need men to step up to the plate, and it has a different result. And I think God made it that way. God gave us the duty to fight and defend.
By the way, Tom is typical of our listeners, David. We insist that you not just take this in. This isn't for entertainment purposes. This is for education.
Yeah.
It's like the trainer that you have when you're in sports, the guy that you don't want to see because he's the one that's going to actually make you do the push-ups and the setups and the chin-ups and you got to get in shape and you got to run. Okay, that's the program you tuned in today, folks. It's a national health program, and we're getting.
How much time do we have left?
You've got, before the break, we've got about 2 minutes, or we can take a break early if you have something you want to.
And are we going to do another segment after that?
Yes, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any other questions, or do you want me to? Because I got a couple things I think you also need to mention about this event.
Okay, before we go to break, you'd mentioned in the city of Delaware, they scheduled the Gay Drag Queen Hour. They scheduled it.
Yeah.
And 8 to 10 people met, and then it became 25, and then it became 50, and then it became 75. And we started going after the county commissioners, after the library board, etc. And the night before that was supposed to happen, it was canceled because we showed up. Now, we didn't have to do what you did, and you can avoid that sort of thing if you apply pressure. Again, this is locally. You don't call your state senator or federal senator, because that ain't going to help you at all. All right, but go local, and it can happen that way. Mr. Anderson, if you can take us to break, and we'll bring David back on. David Worley from Pocatello, Idaho.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with BJ Edwards.
We are back. We're on with David Worley. He's an Idaho native, Christian, Iraqi war veteran, Republican chair for Idaho Legislative District 29. By the way, you've been active in trying to take a leadership role. And brother, I don't know what I would do, or I don't know what Idaho would do if you were the governor of Idaho. Well, I know what they do. It'd be a lot different than what they're doing right now. I think you ran for governor. I think you ran for Senate or mayor, or I
ran for state Senate and I ran for mayor. Yeah.
Okay, mayor. Okay. No. Well, maybe I'm planting the seed. Run for governor. Anyway. Anyway, David, go ahead. The floor is yours. We've got about 10 minutes before we have to end this portion of the show. And thank you very much for what you do and helping us out this morning.
So I'd like to finish up a point you brought up, from the last segment. Go local, focus on what you can do in your own backyard. I mean, people will get obsessed about DC and what they call their congressmen and all that. And that really just doesn't have a lot of impact. And be prepared for a long fight. So like ours, we were able to, get the drag queen show to get out of our library, but it's going to take a long time to put enough pressure on the board and the city council to get rid of all the books that are in the library that have all of this, pornographic material. So that's going to be one fight, and as we start to peel back the onion in our school district, we've had multiple students and parents now tell us that they have school counselors who are helping children transition without telling their parents. And they're explicitly doing this because they know that their parents are Christians and don't want any part of this. So, if this is happening in cities and towns in Idaho, I almost guarantee it's happening somewhere close to you, if not your own schools and your own library. And if they haven't done it, they're going to try to do it. Because unfortunately, we let the left march through all these institutions. They have almost complete institution capture, and it's going to take a lot of effort to reverse that and retake those institutions.
Amen. Amen. Hey, Roger, did you want to comment? We have I think another caller.
Sure.
Are you there, Roger? There you go.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir. You're on.
Oh, I'm
You're
just
here. You're
I'm just
live.
calling.
Go ahead.
I'm just calling in from the Legal Truth Conference in Cincinnati, and at the appropriate time, I would share some things. So,
Okay. We'll do that in the second hour. Okay, Roger?
sounds good.
Alrighty. Thank you. I'm sorry. I interrupted you in stream, David. Go ahead.
Hey, no problem. Yeah. So, and then when we have these events, right, and we actually successfully have, this is a small victory. It's the beginning of hopefully more victories. But I want to bring up two other things that are probably going to happen, and you're going to find this out in your community. So we already talked about how Temple Emmanuel, unfortunately, a very left-wing synagogue decided they're going to host a drag queen show, and they're going to participate in promoting this radical gender ideology and grooming children into sexual sin. Obviously, completely against the Torah, completely against, biblical morality. Well, when stuff like that happens, yes, they're a private organization fighting against, what something's going on in a private institution versus a public institution is a different fight. But we still need to be confrontational. So I brought this up to a group of Christians who are, very supportive of the Jewish community, and they were actually going to fork out a significant amount of money to help that synagogue celebrate their 100th year anniversary. Well, when they found out that the synagogue was going to be hosting the Drag Queen Story Hour and was promoting the sexual immorality, they canceled that event and they pulled back all support. And that's good. So we need to be careful about who we partner with, who we work with. And I think that Christians just need to be a lot more comfortable being confrontational when it comes to these types of issues. And that was a win for us as well, because there needs to be consequences for engaging in gross sexual immorality, especially with children. And if we don't have the political power to impose consequences under the law, then we should use whatever influence we have to impose social consequences in the community. And that's not being unkind. That's not being unloving. It's quite the opposite. If you look at the love of Jesus Christ, and this is something I think we lost, Jesus loves us, and therefore he confronts our sin and calls us to repent and come unto him. Christian love is not the love of the world. It's not this vague, hollow niceness. That's not what Christian love really is. Sometimes Christian love is very much tough love, confrontational, because there's nothing loving about letting children be groomed into sexual immorality, being groomed into a lifestyle where they take hormones and undergo procedures that mutilate themselves, castrate their bodies. That is not love at all. It's quite the opposite. That's not love. That's not niceness. That's not tolerance. It's cowardice not to confront those things.
But they won't feel good if we do things like that, David.
You know what? I'm sure the Sadducees and the Pharisees didn't feel good either. And you know what? When I read the Bible, I don't feel good sometimes, because if you are a human being and you read the scriptures, you're going to find something in there that points out a sin that you're committing. And that's the thing about Jesus' love. He calls you to change and he confronts your sin.
You're a hard man, David. I first of all, I just love the positive approach to things. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, there isn't going to be times that you're going to have stand up and it's going to be negative. I mean, it's going to appear to be negative. It doesn't make any difference, because as a Christian, no matter what you do, positive or negative, seen is going to be seen as negative. Even if you don't do anything, it's still going to, they can take what you don't do and they can take what you do. Interesting. Anyway, and make that look bad. And they do that. But and that shouldn't, look, feelings should not affect what you do. David, you mentioned your family. And this is where, like with COVID, this is where it really, really got in. Satan is a divider. He's a divider, and he likes to corrupt. He wants to destroy, but what he wants to destroy, he first corrupts. He's doing that with our nation. He's doing that with our churches, and he's trying to do that in our families. Divide us. COVID was a great example. And things like these drag queen story hours and gender queer and all the books that the schools are putting in. And it's just incredible how he's corrupting children. You know, we don't let children that are 8 years old drive cars, do we? No. Or vote.
No.
Yet they can choose their sex. Really? And we want to make them feel good. That's the job of educators, by the way, David. Their job is to make people feel good.
Well, and let's I mean, this is all patently absurd, but let's remember what the ultimate higher calling is here. So I've also heard from some Christians, some very well-meaning, who say, you know, do we want the only impression these people have Christians is that they're people who protest and make noise and call out sin and do confrontational things? Isn't that going to hurt our witness? So what I find fascinating when you listen to the detransition stories, you know, people who went into the trans community, had horrible things done to them, and then come out of it. If they become Christians, one of the things that leads them back or leads them to Christ if they never were before is they go, who was the only group who was trying to stop what was happening to me? Who are the only people in my life who were willing to confront me about these terrible mistakes I was making? And you know what? 9 times out of 10, the only people who had the courage to confront anyone about these things were Christians. And so then when they come out of that lifestyle and they're broken and they're in pain because of all the things that were done to them, their path back to Christ often means that they go to those people who, when they were fully immersed in the cult, were the people who they thought were haters and mean people and the intolerant and the bigots and all the other names that people use. They end up going back to those who they once viewed as their persecutors because Christians were the only ones along the way who tried to warn them and tried to stop them. So I think we need to be careful that, yes, when possible, we should be gentle. We should be as loving as possible. But sometimes that tough love is the only thing that's going to lead someone to their Savior.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I got, Bushman's on. Bushman, did you want to get in this morning and have a question? Or you maybe just listening? I just got a couple listeners. I'm sorry, David. I'm trying to coordinate that. And sometimes I don't do well. We're going to have to close this down in a couple minutes, David. Anything else you want to, I don't think how much more you can leave our audience where you are playing our song. And it's I mean, you really are. You have no idea how much of this parallels what we talk about week in and week out. And
if I have one more minute, then I'll just leave with one more thing, because I think it's important that we try and break down as many obstacles to action that exist in Christians' minds. So, Steve Ace talks about this on his show all the time. He is not a perfect man. I am not a perfect man. You are not a perfect man. We all have skeletons in our closet, things that we did in the past, things we wouldn't like to talk about, or maybe we're even involved in sins right now that we're not particularly proud of. We need to repent so that we have spiritual power. But let's not take the Savior's command to first pull the beam out of your own eye before you pull the mote out of your brother's eye, to believe that that means that our eyes have to be spotless, not a speck of dust, before we go out and we actually serve the Lord. That's not what Jesus said. He said, pull the beam out of your own eye. So if you're engaged in some sort of gross wickedness, yeah, you need to repent yourself before you go out onto the battlefield. But no one is perfect. Jesus does not require perfect people to go into the community to preach his word, to confront evil, and to protect the weak and the innocent. That is not who Jesus requires. He requires the willing who will recognize him as Lord. And when we do that, I believe that miracles will happen, words will be given, strength will be given, and that is how we're ultimately going to win.
Bushman wants to chime in real quickly, brother, and then we're going to have to take a hard break. Can you hear us, Bushman?
I can. Hey, David, thank you so much for everything you did up there at that library, and thank you for those words of encouragement. I think that's what debilitates a man, is he looks at himself, he says, I just got all this sin. I can't go and be like David Worley. Yes, you can. The cross covered that sin. And just as our brother David said, disengage from what you're sinning in, and instead use that time to do what that dear man and that pastor and all those other men did. Go to a drag queen story hour at your local library. You can go to your website of your local library and find out if it's happening. And when you see the date, you do exactly what David did instead of sinning. You trade good for evil. That's what we're to do. The cross took care of our sin, men. It took care of our sin. So move in the strength that you have today. Bless you, Brother David. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I was able to catch you before we went to break, or if you was to disengage. So God bless you, David, and may the hand of the Lord consistently be upon you and that wonderful group of men who did what you did in that library. Thanks, BJ.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
David, I got a note here from Johnny Michael. Bless you, David, for passing through the gauntlet and remain standing for what matters. You're men like you are sorely needed. David, I can't tell you how much of an encouragement you've been to us this morning, and just leading by example, and expressing that in the manner you have has just been incredible. Mr. Anderson, do we have a 2-minute warning? I don't know. Can't hear you, Mr. Anderson.
I'm that silent partner here.
Yeah.
Not really. I'll play a reminder about the book, what you opened the show with, and David, you said so much. It's incredible. Just, that's a sermon that needs to be preached, and your advice about church is really, really important. I think we need to be involved in churches, but you got to step into the right one, and you're not going to be always welcomed right away if you have some of these ideas. But I think you got to work your way in, build relationships with people, and start sharing what you know, and be willing to accept correction as well as correct, and go together. And your idea, or not your idea, but your advice about getting that log out of your own eye is extremely vital. And the church can help do that, because it does make you accountable, and being willing to, as I said, accept correction, learn new knowledge, and just remember everything we learned is a lie, and start learning truth. I say that kind of universally, but so much of our education is off base, and people hang on to things too long and they aren't ready to let go. So opening your heart and your mind, not so much that your brains leak out, but so that you can hear new information or old information that is truth.
You can save that 2-minute warning, Mr. Anderson, for the next hour. We're gonna have to close this out. David Worley, Pocatello, Idaho. Thank you very much. God bless you, brother. Real quick, is there any kind of contact information you want to leave with folks?
Not necessarily. I mean, I really don't have much of a public persona I maintain right now. I still worleyforidaho.com is my old campaign website. If you want to get in contact with me, some contact information is there.
Thank you, David Worley. God bless, Godspeed, and keep up the good work.
Hey, thank you.
Mr. Anderson, if you would, please.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with BJ Edwards.
And we are back, second hour. We're going to talk about best practices today. I think it's something that has been, sorely overlooked and definitely not being practiced, that's for sure. Best practices. Definition. What are you talking about, BJ? Best practices. Best practices are a set of guidelines, ethics, or ideas that represent the most efficient and prudent course of action in a given situation, which through proven experience and research makes for optimal results, establishing a standard suitable for widespread adoption. According to Indeed.com and others, best practices lead to optimal efficiency and results in particular situation, eliminating costly, time-consuming redos. Oh, how we need to redo the past 2 years. Amen. Whew. What have we done best practices? Internally, an organization's upper management could create them, or external government authorities such as regulatory organizations might create them. They can also be industry benchmarks, meaning that their highly successful organization can share the practices that lead to its success with other organizations in its field. And by the way, upper management also includes parents. Best practices there. Who's the ultimate judge in their own children's upbringing other than any of the aforementioned institutions? In today's world, who's controlling the best practices of parents, of families? Yeah, right. You're thinking of news headlines, aren't you? We're going to get to those in various areas. But in the family, it's just incredible. I mean, Mr. Anderson and I and others in our local city are fighting. We're fighting the schools. The schools are offering books to children in the libraries that would otherwise be considered pornographic material if it wasn't for the fact that they were educational. This is the best practices, one of the best practices of our schools and our cities, to put Playboy magazines. I'm sorry. To put books in there, pictorial books that show what I'm going to consider, I was going to say unnatural, but I'll just say poor practices as versus best practices. The Constitution, a book on the Constitution, or a book showing how to practice unique sexual acts, which the Bible might call sodomy, which psychologists call perhaps fellatio, cunnilingus. Parents, if we don't allow parental best practices, we'll just take a look at our society today and tell me what you see, especially from children. Just saying, best practices. And it's all over the place. I've got cultural best practices, business best practices, border and immigration best practices. There you go. A nation is defined by its borders, language, and culture, right? I just heard this morning that 2 dead bodies were discovered, and the press used the term, by the way, immigrants. They're trespassers. Were found on a train that they and several other trespassers were illegally using to enter the U.S. from Mexico. God only knows what nation they came from. Words mean things, right? Immigrants, undocumented immigrants, not trespassers, not invaders, but innocent sounding immigrants. And please, I'm not downgrading the value of life, but keep in mind our current best practices, actually poor border practices, actually cause these deaths, folks. Headline: Washington Democrats introduced legislation to eliminate need for public safety officials to read English. A nation is defined by what? Border, language, and culture. If you don't have any borders, you don't have a main language, and your culture is being attacked, what have you got? Are we USA? Are we Mexico? Are we Canada? How many new diseases and old diseases have been introduced back into America as a result of our open borders best practices, where they don't have a health clinic to screen those aforementioned trespassers? Oh, I'm sorry. Undocumented. Public schools now offer ESL, English as a second language, throughout the fruited plains. This is from Fox News. Some Democrats in Washington state are trying to eliminate the requirements for police officers and other public safety officials to be able to read and write in English. SB 5274 seeks to expand eligibility in certain civil service positions to allow lawful permanent residents, lawful permanent residents to apply. Language, borders, culture. Are we Brazil? Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Oh, I had an interesting piece of mail yesterday. Got it from the STRS, State Teachers Retirement Program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was announcing another benefit I could have. Yay. But included with that was a sheet of paper, 2 sides, with the message printed in, I didn't count the number of languages, but it was like I said, 2 sides of the paper, all with different languages: Chinese, Japanese, even Spanish was there. It was hard to find my own language to read what they were sending me, which is English. That's the one I'm speaking now.
Ink costs
American form of English.
Ink costs money, paper costs money. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Well, it's just the idea of what you're saying, languages. We like to say, well, we're diverse, and we do, and we are diverse. But in the early years, if I remember reading a little bit about immigrants coming into America and passing through Ellis Island, and some of the things weren't always real pleasant, but they were determined to come here and become American, not come here and be what they left, but they wanted to be here for a reason, and they wanted to enjoy the benefits of living in a Christian free society. And now we're opening the doors to anything and everything, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, now of what we should expect and not expect, or accept what we accept.
Well, some of these, the old immigrants would come with $5 or $10 in their pocket, and that's all they had.
Yeah.
And they had to start from the ground up. Today's immigrants, trespassers, illegal aliens, and all they have to do is wear a mask, and the government will take care of them. Here, we'll house you over here. Don't worry about clothing. Don't worry about feeding. We'll take care of that. Yep, put your child in our schools. We'll educate them. We'll even speak the language to them.
And the question is, why are we doing that?
Yep. Well, because we're good people. Let me tell you why we're doing this, folks. One of the main reasons is that years ago, we decided that there shouldn't be anyone that's advantaged in America, let alone the world. So what we did is, well, you have a certain level, okay? You can't go any lower than that certain level. So what we did, instead of pointing the arrow up, accomplishments, we started putting the arrow down for our students in schools especially, which gravitated into society. But we don't, you have a classroom of 30, you want to bring them down to the lowest denominator, right? Because it wouldn't be fair. So what do children see? What are those that want to excel? What do they see? Why bother to excel? If I come down to this level, society will like me better. Because society is telling me, because I'm at this level, I'm not a good person. Because I'm this skin color, I'm not a good person. Because I'm not this nationality, I'm not a good person. Do you understand what happened here? We brought, in our effort, equality, to bring equality out there, we have basically put those that want to excel at a disadvantage and discourage that exercise.
Absolutely.
And that's why, go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
I'm just saying, yeah, it's absolutely like standardized test. I mean, you only have to achieve a certain level to be successful now. It doesn't mean exceed. It just means you have to achieve a standard level, which at best is average.
Not even that, Mr. Anderson. Not
anymore. Average has been, the average bar has been lowered.
Okay. I get that. And I'm going to let you in a minute, Tom. Need to understand what we've done. We've brought everything down to one level. Now, I want you to think about, again, this English is a second language. The bill that they're trying to pass removes the requirement that applicants for certain civil service positions must be able to read and write in English. The bill applies to applicants for city police force, firefighters, and sheriff's office, fish and wildlife officers. Think about that. That's vocational. Think about the families of these invaders. Now, if we're going, let me tell you what our future is. If we're going to really be inclusive, you can't just bring in a son, a daughter, a mother, and a father. What about the grandparents? Huh? What about the extended family? Don't they deserve to be in America as well? And aren't we going to soon hear, well, the mother and father is here, but BJ, you say families are important. So don't we need to bring the families in? Huh? And pay for them and support them until they can make it? Yeah, I know. As long as they're wearing a mask, it's okay. Right? Or maybe if they've had their vax, it'll be okay. Or whatever the newest thing is that's going out there from the government. America is being destroyed because we want to be inclusive. And there are no limits. There are no best practices. You can do anything you want to do. There's no best practices for our borders, right? Huh? It used to be that you had to meet certain qualifications to get into the country. Now all you have to do is be in the country. That's the qualification. If you can somehow get across that border, risk your life, swim that river, deal with the mafia, Mexican mafia.
Turn on the tears.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell a good sob story.
Yeah. Find a 5-year-old child that's shivering, and you want to take them across the border to help them out. Boom. Once they're there, the unwritten law is that they're okay, that they can stay. Our border best practices, and I use that term lightly, aren't best practices. I want you to think in terms of best practices. You can criticize all you want, but ask your local official, what's the best practice for a nation to remain a nation? My God, if you can see what's happening here, folks, this is just absolutely incredible. We're being destroyed from within. And I have no idea how much more we can take of what we have from our quote unquote political leadership. From the former vice president to the current vice president. This is just absolutely amazing what we're allowing to happen. And keep in mind, listen, go back to that first hour, listen to Dave. And there are people like him. There are women out there that are looking for men to back them up. Mr. Anderson, let's take a break. When we go back, we'll let Tom verbalize here as well. B.J. Edwards along with Mr. Anderson. This is your last call. Grr.
Last call with B.J. Edwards. Real talk about real life.
Mr. Anderson, why don't you bring Tom in? And Tom, do we have to be dumb on purpose? Is that a requirement to be an American these days?
I'm right with you, BJ, Mr. Anderson. What they're calling best practices these days really are not best practices. And I think a lot of it, stems back to the fact that we're not obeying the word of God, what's in the Bible. You mentioned the meritocracy thing earlier, that we're lowering standards in order to try to make things even for everybody.
What is meritocracy? What is meritocracy? What does that mean?
Meritocracy means that everybody has the opportunity to achieve, but then based upon people's skills and their effort and the hard work they put into it, let them achieve what they achieve. And if they turn out to be the best, then they're the best. If they don't turn out to be the best, then they need to try their hand maybe at something else. But you shouldn't penalize the people who are the achievers and lower the standards for others in order to try to create that kind of society. And I think
look bad, Tom. They make other people look bad. How dare you?
Well, I think it actually stems back to one of the 10 Commandments: "Thou shalt not covet." I think people who cannot achieve want to lower the standards and maybe punish the achievers in the process to try to level the playing field. So to me, it stems back to one of the commandments. And then, as you talked about in your second example about the porous borders we have, especially with the south of Mexico, that I think is "thou shalt not steal." These people are stealing citizenship. They're trying to become Americans without going through the proper process of becoming Americans. We're a country. We love immigrants. We love them coming into the country, but we want them to do it in an orderly fashion, not to steal their citizenship and steal money and things from other Americans. So I think a lot of these, what they think are best practices and what we think are not best practices, actually stem all the way back to the breaking of the commandments. And if you think about it, our founding fathers, when they founded the country and started an education system, they realized it was important to have an educated populace, but also a moral populace as well. So they included the Bible and teachings of the Bible in their curriculum for the kids. And the people of the late 1700s, early 1800s were very educated people. Even the ordinary man knew quite a bit about the Bible and morality and the founding of this country. They were fairly well educated people. Most of them could read and write. And I was reading a book by Steve Deace. We talked a lot about Steve in the first hour, and along with David there, in this new book that he has called Nefarious. He's got a movie coming out in the middle of this next month. It's based upon a book called A Nefarious Plot. And one of the most important statements he makes in the Nefarious Plot, basically it's the devil, is he's talking to you and I in this book, and he's bragging about how he has churned our whole society into a demonic, loving, decadent society that's turned its back on God. And one of the most poignant statements that's made in the entire novel is, he says, good luck having a government that's based upon God-given rights when the society no longer believes in God. And I think that statement really struck me, because I think that's what all of our problems we're having now are stemming from the fact that we as a society, not everybody, but we as a society, a lot of us have turned our backs on God. We're putting into place what we think are best practices, but if you really look at the core of them, you'll find things like jealousy, coveting, stealing, murdering, a lot of the base nature of human nature, sloth, laziness, those kind of things are at the basis of a lot of what we put into practice now, our government, or at least our government has, that's really turned its back on God and the Ten Commandments. I'd like to get your gentleman's perspective on that.
I think you're a xenophobe.
Yeah.
I think you're a xenophobe. I don't know whether Roger wants to comment on this or not. But before I do that, I've got I love our listeners. I love our listeners. I didn't think of this, but this makes so much sense. We've exchanged quality for equality. Think about that. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that something? Roger, you got anything to say? Guess not. I can't. Unmute yourself, Roger, if you can. Roger's technologically challenged like I am.
The question is, BJ, what are we going to do about it? What, we see that what they're saying are best practices are actually, like I said, based upon things that are anti-Bible, anti-10 Commandments. How do you point this out to people and get them to change their ways?
Good point. And I have a practical exercise I'm going to give to the listeners before the end of the show, which will help answer what you're talking about, Tom. It's part of an educational process, but you have to be educated on it. And I appreciate your comments. I just, this quality for equality thing, I'm embarrassed that I didn't think about that, because that's exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing. Equal, equality. Where are you from?
And you see it happen, like you put Pete Buttigieg in charge of your transportation department, and then he knows nothing about it, and then he was a hire, basically a diversity hire, because he's gay, but he knew nothing about the subject matter. And then you have things like the train derailments, and he doesn't know what to do when that happens, and and your society starts to fall apart because, like you say, meritocracy is no longer in charge, and now it's based upon diversity and equity, and that can become a problem when you're on the operating table and you want the best doctor operating on you.
Just thinking about that. I want a doctor that's going to operate on me that has gone through the equality, that he's not there because of his qualifications. He's there because of equality. I want that individual to operate on me. What's that, honey? Yeah, my wife says, and make sure your insurance policy is paid up before you do that. Okay, I get that.
And everybody feels that way. Everybody wants the best doctor working on them, right? You don't want somebody who was there who maybe didn't deserve to be there, who had cut corners to get there. So it doesn't make any sense.
Amen. Hang in there with us, Roger. I don't know whether you want to come in or not. I keep seeing you, but you don't unmute yourself. So you're going to have to unmute yourself before I acknowledge you. How's that? Quality for equality. I absolutely love that. And yes. Politics best practice. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, this is just hot off the wire from the Bab Bee. Evidently, District Attorney Alan Bragg is reportedly set to indict Donald Trump this coming Tuesday for removal of a mattress tag back in 1997. Huh? According to sources, new evidence was discovered in the mattress tag cold case by Grizzly Detective Harry Jakes, who utilized modeling advances in forensic science to place former President Donald Trump at the scene of the crime. You see, you don't remove those tags, right? You see that all the time. Mattress tag in question belonged to Spring Air Comforting Forma mattress from 97, which historians claim featured a warning label advising mattress tags not to be removed. Like I said, in a surprise move, Trump has not denied the troubling accusation. He does maintain doing so was not illegal. The tag says, don't remove except by consumer. And I'm a huge consumer. Probably the greatest of all time. And I have every right to remove that tag. The deep state is trying to dig up anything they can just to keep me from reclaiming the presidential throne. This, again, is a witch hunt. Now, independent fact checkers have rated Trump's claim as bald-faced lie, citing the president does not sit on a throne. Also, he is Trump, and that is bad. The fact checker article does not make mention of the mattress tag issue directly, but does note Trump broke both federal and international laws, probably. The United Nations Committee has been assembled to investigate whether the matter qualifies as a war crime. This is an open shut case. Now he'll never be president. I did it, Craig claimed before quickly correcting himself. I mean, no one is above the law. At publishing time, Trump's approval polling surged among mattress consumers who have long been befuddled by the mattress tag warning. So there you go.
Now, wait a minute, though, BJ.
Huh?
Trump should be able to win that case, though, because he can get a very good character witness. He can call up Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, who knows all about it.
Oh, that's crazy. That's crazy. Best practices. Where am I going to go? Politics. That's a little long. Foreign relations, health and well-being. We kind of talked about that a little bit. Health and well-being. Appeals court blocks Biden order forcing federal employees to get COVID-19 vaccine. Is that a best practice? That is. Dr. Tucker, we are witnessing a national health emergency. Yes, we are. But it's been going on longer than 3 years, folks. 3 years. Doctors, there are very few independent doctors. Very few. We have them joining organizations, Trinity Health, etc. And they have to do what the corporation thinks is best. I once made a jacket out of those tags, sold at a garage sale. Now I know who bought it. Okay. That's from Martin. Doctor board certifies revoked for making allegedly false and misleading claims about COVID vaccine. In other words, if you are a doctor and you are independent, the government will come after you. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, BJ, they're still going after the licenses of doctors who promote things like ivermectin. This is still happening today.
Yep.
You know, we're 3 years into this pandemic, and we've seen the failure of the vaccines, but yet anybody who still wants to do anything otherwise with early treatment are still being persecuted, not prosecuted, but persecuted by their own medical boards. So these doctors are bravely standing up. Good attorneys like Tom Renz from here in Ohio and Jeff Childers in Florida are defending these types of doctors, but they're still afraid to come forward and do the right thing. The doctors are, because the medical tyranny is harshest on them.
Now, keep in mind, folks, we've talked kiddingly about wanting somebody to operate on us that got straight A's in equality, or is there because they're an equality candidate. Keep in mind that your doctor is working. If he's working for an organization, he's going to have to follow those organizational lines, or he's going to lose his security. He's going to have to go out there and be an entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur isn't easy, folks. It's difficult. And when you have that business behind you that's going to pay for your benefits, that's going to take care of the legal aspect, you could be sued if you make a mistake as a doctor. They need to stay under that umbrella, that comfort zone. Keep that in mind. Is that a best practice? Is that who you want treating you? And what about the pharmaceutical firms? They pay politicians handsomely to support their laws. That politicians don't write the laws. Special interest groups write laws, folks. You know that, right? They write the laws. They're paid. These politicians are. I'm going to run for Congress again. The politician's job is to get elected and stay elected. That's their job. In order to do that, it takes money. Where are you going to get the money from? What's the biggest source of money? Other than teachers' unions or unions, NEA, it's the pharmaceutical firms. As a matter of fact, I think if you really looked under the covers, you'd find that it's mostly the pharmaceutical firms. Mm-hmm. They are controlling what's going on here. Is this the best practice? Is this the best practice? You know, I went to a school board or a city council meeting, and I talked about a subject matter. But the next time I approach the city council, it's going to be about best practices. It's going to be about family best practices. What is the best way to bring up a child? What's the best practice for a family? Is it one man and one biologically born man and one woman? If so, why? You take a look at history. You take a look at archaeology. And it's all going to tell you that the best practices got us to where we are today. And that is one biological born man, one biological born woman. I mean, that's just the way it is. Where we are on time. I think we're probably going to have to go to a break. Come back. Health and well-being. I went through that. Parenting, we kind of got into that. Maybe discuss a little further that. But please keep in mind, we're talking about best practices. We're not talking about exceptions. We're talking about equality. We're talking about best practices. And it's about time America started doing that, starting emphasizing that, as versus lowering everything down to one level. B.J. Edwards along, Mr. Anderson, your last call.
Keeping you informed. This is Last Call with B.J. Edwards.
We're going to talk off and on about parenting best practices, political best practices. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. The lesser of the evils. How is it we always end up with the lesser of the evils? Because we don't do a best practices. Is the best practices, if you're running for office, is to criticize who you're running against? Is that it? So people know that they're getting the lesser of the evils? How's that going to affect you when you get into office? It's not going to affect you very well.
Yeah, people, when you're running for office, you really should be touting what policies you'd put in place, right? Instead of this whole negative. But they've done research and they've shown that negative campaigns is a better use of your TV dollars and your TV time on those commercials than it is to say things positive about yourself in terms of what you plan on doing and the policies you plan on implementing. So then that's what all these commercials are negative smears on your opponent. And it really drags society down, doesn't it, gentlemen?
It does. Go ahead, Tom.
Again, it goes back to the Bible, right? You're gossiping, you're talking bad about your fellow man, your neighbor, which is God doesn't want us to do that, right? So we wind up with these people getting elected, people voting against Trump because they've been told he's a racist and he's a horrible orange man bad, and they really don't know the man. They really don't know. They don't even want to talk about the policies that he had in place. They just want to automatically assign him with negativity because that's what the mainstream media told them. And we do the same thing on the right. We villainize Joe Biden and the people on the left as well. But we should do a better job of taking a look at what their policies are and saying, are these policies best practices like you're talking about? Are they going to put, the Democrats, for example, put the welfare state into place back in the mid 60s with maybe a good intent. Maybe the intent was that, hey, we want to try to lift people out of poverty, but it had just the opposite effect. It trapped people in poverty because instead of teaching them to fish, it gave them a fish just enough to survive on, but not enough to give them the energy to go out and make a better life for themselves. So we have to take a better look at whatever laws we have in place and make sure that they better match the 10 Commandments, what the other teachings of the Bible are. And like I said, trying to stay away from those things like jealousy, greed, laziness, etc.
10 Commandments are kind of a best practice, Tom?
They're definitely a best practice. One of the ones that's under attack you mentioned earlier is honor thy father and thy mother. We're seeing that the schools now are getting in there and saying, hey, kids, you don't have to honor your father and your mother. They don't know crap. We're going to tell you what's up. We're going to tell you what's really what the world's all about, right? We're going to tell you about the different 57 different genders. And if your mom and dad say there's only 2, well, they're wrong. So, we have a battle. And that wasn't the way when you and I were kids. And Mr. Anderson, when we went to school, I think our parents did a good job, or our teachers did a good job of supporting what our parents were teaching us at home. They seemed to be working in cooperation with each other. Now, today, it seems just the opposite. The teachers and the school counselors seem to be working at loggerheads with the parents.
And again, they have a financial anchor that they can't get away from. If they speak up, they're going. You never see a teacher very seldom see a teacher getting fired. That just doesn't happen. They move them to another school. They don't fire them. But if you want to get fired, speak up against the woke agenda, and I can guarantee you that's going to happen. I'm going to talk about political best practices and give an example. Look, I've said before that when you are opposing somebody, you want to lift up your Republican that you're running, trying to get that bid for the office for. And what you need to do if you're a Republican is to build up that individual and then show people that you're better than that individual. In other words, they're up here, but oh, wait a minute, BJ's up there. I never, and I feel good about this. I feel good about it. You know, there is something going on with one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis as was found criticizing Manhattan District Attorney Alan Bragg for pursuing his criminal investigation against former President Donald Trump for allegedly hush money payments to adult performer Stormy Daniels. He hasn't received information about any indictment of Trump, who lives in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. He told reporters at a press conference on March 20, rumors have circulated that Trump's indictment is imminent. This is Ron DeSantis, an opponent of the president, former president. But the governor expressed irritation at being distracted from running the nation's third largest state by what he regards as little more than a publicity stunt by Soros-funded prosecutor. What he's doing, two things. He's elevating Trump, and he's also criticizing Democrats. Two things. This is a twofer. We're not involved in this. We won't be involved in this. I have no interest in getting involved in some kind of a manufactured circus by a Soros-funded DA. He's trying to do a political spectacle. He's trying to virtue signal for his base. I've got real issues. I've got to deal with him here in Florida. Right. So basically what he's doing is also saying, by the way, I'm doing a good job here in Florida, and he is doing a good job there in Florida. And I'm not going to criticize Trump, but I'm going to criticize those that are criticizing him. He's lifting up his opponent. Now, what should Donald Trump do?
The same thing, right? He should come back and support Ron DeSantis as well. They shouldn't be trying to dump on each other, and Ron gets that, but Donald needs to get that too. Yeah, because Americans are happy with what Ron DeSantis has done. He won his state by 20 points because he stood up and he fought corporations like Disney. I just watched a video of him the other day. He wants legislation now to outlaw central bank digital currencies in the state of Florida. Yeah. He's doing a lot of things in that state to go to bat for the average American for our freedom, whether it's a Democrat or Republican that lives in the state. He's trying to give those people freedom that live in his state and have them grow up. People be in a state that doesn't have not subjected to grooming and all that kind of stuff as well. So he's trying to follow the tenets of the Bible. And I think the best thing Donald Trump could do is not dump on Ron DeSantis, but like you say, build him up, because then that makes Donald Trump look better, not worse, better. Looks like he's like a man.
It's the biblical principle. We talk about biblical principles. Well, a house divided, they're already showing a divided house in the political arena, in the public eye. You know, it's like, well, even the Republicans can't agree on things. So
you got to keep things I mean, like this library thing, and like we did at the Delaware City. You have to try to keep this on a positive note. It's very difficult to do, by the way, because our nature is to criticize. That's point, especially if you're a Christian, by the way. I'm sorry, but that's especially because we now get it. We've had the stroke, the Holy Spirit stroke, and we now get it. And that's why there's over 300 denominations, because we all get it in our own little way. Or is it 3,000 denominations? Doesn't make any difference. As long as it's 3 or more, you got a problem. Or 2 or more, you got a problem. So anyway, DeSantis went on to criticize his attorney, a county district attorney in his area, which he got rid of. And he used that as an example of getting what Bragg is doing. You know, downgrading 50% of felonies, et cetera, et cetera. And Tom, you kind of broached on it. What was Trump's reaction to this? Ron DeSanctimonious?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Trump. You're better than that. Look, I like it when he does that to the Democrats, okay? But when he does it to his own body, and he's doing that to himself. He doesn't
Exactly.
recognize he's doing that to himself, to his party.
Yes.
And we have to stop this. Elevate. I want to run against that guy because he's good. I think I have a better idea. What do you think? As versus,
Right.
I like that idea, and here's what he did wrong, and that's what he did wrong. And so all right. I'm going to go with BJ because he's just a lesser of the evils. If you can bring out more negatives against your opponent than he can bring them against you, then you've won. Normally, and I don't even know what's going on in the next coming elections. I'm almost ready to make a prediction that doesn't make any difference what the Republicans do or who runs. They're not going to win. But I'm not going to get into that conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but I think what Mr. Anderson said though is really important about, like I say, not dividing our own house. If you base things on the Bible and the candidates' campaign with that as their basic mooring, then we won't get into that kind of division. The other side, their ideology though, they're not basing their ideology on the Bible, and their ideology is just bound to fall apart. I was listening to, there's a podcast called The Young Turks. It's a popular
Yeah,
leftist
I know it is.
with Cenk Younger and Anna Kasparin are the two main anchors. Well, Anna Kasparin the other day put out a tweet saying something. I'm getting a little tired of this. I don't want anybody any further to refer to me as a birthing person or a person who menstruates. She wants to be called a woman, basically. She's getting tired of this whole woke crap. That's from her own side. And remember, she is one of the lefties there is. And she is catching all kinds of grief from her own side because their whole ideology just falls apart, right? It makes no sense at all. It's not based on reality. Men can be women, women can be men. 57 genders. It's okay for kids to mutilate their bodies and become a different sex. It makes no sense whatsoever. So their ideology is destined to fall apart. It's doomed to fall apart because it's not based upon any solid foundation.
Yeah, Tom, you can only run so far until you're going to run into a wall of truth. Smack dab in. That's what's happening. You can only go so far out. You got imagination is not limitless. You can only go so far out. And we're talking about humanism, folks. That is what we're talking about. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. Humanism. It's about me. I know best. I hear what you're saying, Lord. I want to test it. Okay, I don't trust you. I want to test it. And then when you test it and the pain happens, you blame the Lord for it. Well, it was your fault. You created pain. Okay, I'm not going to get off on that tangent. Mr. Anderson, for the next break, play that 3-minute things that are happening, who's controlling it. And then I'm going to get into the practical exercise that I promised earlier. We're talking about best practices, folks. And we're going through, you go through the culture. San Francisco mulls over creating 50 million reparations office to be strictly in part of reparations. Democrats make Oregon a safe haven for child sex changes. 3 years is not enough. Liberal Wisconsin's Supreme Court candidate ignored victims' plea to lock up serial sex offenders. Talk about gay marriage, gay adoption, law and order. Oh my goodness. Baker. Yeah. The Baker can't, he's been, I probably the past 10 years, he's had to go to court to defend his business. He won one court case, but then they put another court case against him with a little different tweaks to it. So therefore, the courts allowed it to happen. Folks, we live in an amoral and unjust nation. An amoral and unjust nation. I was at a lecture the other night where the individual was talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it's all good stuff. But it doesn't work if you're an amoral and unjust nation. It will not work. I'm sorry, if you're an amoral nation, you're going to be an unjust nation because laws, decisions are going to vary. They're elastic. One day it'll be this, the next day it'll be that. What can you do? Let me tell you where we've gotten to, and I want Mr. Anderson to play that video. This is where we are. This is who we're blaming it on. And then I'm going to give you a practical exercise to help walk you out of this and get you off of your chair, stop drinking your favorite adult beverage, and get in the game like David, our guest of the first hour, did. And please, listen to that first hour. Listen to that first hour. There's so much wisdom there coming from that man who's been in the battle, not for a month, not for a week, not for a year. He's in it until it's over with. And that's where you need to be, but you need to get in before you do anything else, folks. You have to get into the game. Look, I'm going to tell you something right now. You want to play an away game. All right. You want to make this an away game. You don't want to make this a home game. Don't wait till it comes into your home. Because when it does, it gets a lot more serious. And there's a lot more sacrifices that you're going to have to make. B.J. Edwards along, Mr. Anderson. This is your last call. If you would, Mr. Anderson, please play that video.
Mistakes Were Not Made, An Anthem for Justice by Margaret Anna Alice. The Armenian genocide was not a mistake. Holodomor was not a mistake. The final solution was not a mistake. The Great Leap Forward was not a mistake. The killing fields were not a mistake. Name your genocide. It was not a mistake. That includes the great democide of the 2020s. To imply otherwise is to give them the out they are seeking. It was not botched. It was not bungled. It was not a blunder. It was not incompetence. It was not lack of knowledge. It was not spontaneous mass hysteria. The planning occurred in plain sight. The planning is still occurring in plain sight. The philanthropaths bought the science. The modelers projected the lies. The testers concocted the crisis. The NGOs leased the academics. The scientists fabricated the findings. The mouthpieces spewed the talking points. The organizations declared the emergency. The governments erected the walls. The departments rewrote the rules. The governors quashed the rights. The politicians passed the laws. The bankers installed the control grid. The stooges laundered the money. The DoD placed the orders. The corporations fulfilled the contracts. The regulators approved the solution. The laws shielded the contractors. The agencies ignored the signals. The behemoths consolidated the media. The psychologists crafted the messaging. The propagandists chanted the slogans. The fact chokers smeared the dissidents. The censors silenced the questioners. The jackboots stomped the dissenters. The tyrants summoned, the puppeteers jerked, the puppets danced, the colluders implemented, the doctors ordered, the hospitals administered. The menteciders scripted, the bamboozles bleated, the totalitarianized bullied, the covidians tattled, the parents surrendered, the good citizens believed and forgot. This was calculated, this was formulated, this was focus grouped, this was articulated, this was manufactured, this was falsified, this was coerced, this was inflicted, this was denied. We were terrorized, we were isolated, we were gaslit, we were dehumanized, we were wounded, we were killed. Don't let them get away with it. Don't let them get away with it. Don't let them get away with it.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Johnny Michael, A House Divided. All because we the people have forgotten, denied, been brainwashed to never assume the proper position in our governmental structure. It is we the people, folks. We the people. And I don't care I don't care. To me, it doesn't matter whether this has been planned or whether it's an accident or result of natural laws. It doesn't make any difference. You have a choice. You can sit, let it happen, saying you can't do anything about it, or you can get in there and you can participate. Let me help get you started. We've been talking about best practices. I'm going to thank Mrs. BJ for that because it opened up a whole new world for me. Here's a recommendation I have to our listeners. And I consider this to be a constructive exercise. And I want you to conduct this next week. First of all, take a couple of 8x11 sheets of lined paper. I don't care what color it is. It can be yellow. It can be white. I don't care. On the top of one page, print the words best practice or best practices. Okay? And for 1 week on that sheet, put down what you believe to be the best practices you have seen during the week. And you're probably going to have to list those by headlines. Just the headline, like we've been doing this morning, from social media, news media, or whatever the source. It could be what you saw happen in your neighborhood. One quick sentence, describe it. Best practice now. What you see as a best practice, what you think was good. On the second sheet, put the words poor practice. And for this category, you might need more than one sheet of paper, by the way. Just saying. Then list during the week the poor practices that you've noticed. Again, just take them from the headlines. Foreign relations, best practice. Russia, bad. Ukraine, good. More money to Ukraine. Armed Russian jets have flown over U.S. military base in Syria each day. Closing Canadian borders bottle up the USA. They can come in, but they can't get out. Iran missiles aimed at our troops. List them. Best practices, poor practices. If there's a specific interest to you, by the way, let's say schools, healthcare, border practices, politics, whatever, consider those headlines, consider those items as 2-pointer for your particular article. Now, again, this is 2 pointers for positives, best practices, 2 pointers for poor practices. Then add up both sheets. If the poor practices outweigh the best practices, and it will, if you're being honest, keep in mind we still live in the Socialist Republic of America. Amen. And when you see the heavy imbalance on the part of the poor practice, then ask yourself how you, your family, your friends, your associates, and neighbors can put your finger on that scale, okay? Put the finger on the best practices scale by adding your weighty works to the better side, which will balance things out. Now, by the way, if your show has a majority in the best practice category, take next Saturday off because you're definitely listening to the wrong program. Best practices. Think in terms of best practices. Again, when I addressed the city council, I talked about natural and unnatural behaviors. But if I go to that city council and I say to them, you have a city manager. Does the city, Mr. City Manager, do you have best practices? Guidelines? Preferred guidelines? Sure you do. If there's a hole in the highway, you fill it up with water, or do you cement it over or blacktop it over? What's your best practices? If the traffic light isn't working on a corner, when you fix it, you just make it a blinking light, or do you make it red, green, and yellow? That's best practices, right? Isn't that what we're talking about? So you do practice best practices. So when it comes to the family, what's the best practices? You're talking about celebrating a practice where a man can be a man, or a woman can be the mother or father of a child, whatever they choose to be. You want to celebrate unhealthy practices. A child needs a mother and a father, one male, one female. And when you take that out of the family, a sociologist, historian, archaeologist will tell you that's not good for the child. So you have a choice. You have the natural family. The aforementioned one man, one woman, lifelong, committed, monogamous relationship. You keep the mother and the father in the home. Which practice do you want to refer to your community? What is the best practice? Let them answer that. Let that convict them. And whatever decision they make, you're going to consider that to be a best practice. People in your city are going to consider that to be a best practice. If you're in schools and you have books that are promoting ungodly sexual behaviors, unnatural sexual behaviors, is promoting that book a best practice? Really? People know the difference. You don't have to be a Christian. We're all born with an internal app, a software program, if you will. We know the difference between right and wrong. And that's what you're appealing to in your particular area. I mean, I just mentioned a couple areas. Pick your area out, be it in politics, be it health and well-being. Doesn't make any difference. Make them see Exhibit A and Exhibit B, and let them know that they're making a decision between A and B. You can help list the positives on both ends, if you will, but list both, make them take a look at both. Don't let them operate in a vacuum, acting like there's nothing else out there. There is a best practice for everything. Bring that to their attention. And hopefully they're going to make the right decision. That doesn't guarantee it, but I think you've done your best job, best positive job by doing that. I just love the people that I get to talk with because I made a decision for righteousness. Next week, I talked to a young lady from Idaho, 26 years old. And I'm going to compare her to Aiden Haggard, who we had on our show recently. Homeschooled, and boy, has she done a lot of things at a very young age. And it's because her parents, primarily because her parents, had best practices. We got to run, folks. Thank you very much for listening in today. Remember, put that sheet together. I want to hear from you next week. B.J. Edwards along with Mr. Anderson, your last call.
Join us next week for Last Call with B.J. Edwards.